Dust rolled across the main street of Redemption, ridge as the noon sun beat down like a blacksmith's hammer. The town had gathered outside the saloon and general store, eyes squinting toward the ridge where the stagecoach would soon appear, the same way they did every month when new mail-order brides, drifters, or hopeful dreamers arrived with more expectations than dollars in their pockets. Among the crowd, leaning against a porch post of the sheriff's office, stood Eli Mercer, tall, broad-shouldered, a dark beard framing a face weathered by wind and loss. Eli was a rancher and a widower, known for working harder than any two men and talking less than anyone. Folks said the land had stolen his smile along with his first wife, who died 3 winters back in a fever so cruel it had taken her and their unborn child within days. Since then, Eli's world had shrunk to cattle, fences, and the fading memory of laughter in his farmhouse kitchen. But today, for the first time in a long time, he felt something like nerves. Rumor had it that the new preacher's nieces were arriving on this coach, and one of them, by all accounts, was the kind of beauty men wrote bad poetry about and women secretly resented. The stagecoach rattled into town in a cloud of red dust, the horses snorting and stamping as it rolled to a stop in front of the livery. Kids ran alongside, cheering, while men straightened their vests and women tried to appear unimpressed. Eli watched with his arms crossed, jaw tight. The driver swung down, opened the door, and out stepped the first woman, a vision in a pale, blue dress that caught the light like morning sky over snow. Her hair was golden and pinned in perfect curls, framing a heart-shaped face with eyes the color of summer cornflowers. The crowd let out a collective breath. "That must be her," murmured Mrs. Halper from the general store. "The pretty one." The woman smiled at the attention, shoulders back, aware of the way everyone stared like she was a painting come to life. She moved aside as the second woman stepped down from the coach, and the change in the crowd's reaction was like a gust of cold wind. The second woman wore a plain brown dress, its hem dusty from travel. Her dark hair was twisted into a simple knot, no ribbons or fancy pins, and her figure was sturdy rather than delicate. A faint scar curved along her jawline like a pale crescent, and her eyes, though intelligent and searching, were guarded, as if they'd learned long ago to expect the worst from folks. Whispers slithered through the air like snakes. "That must be the other one," someone muttered. "The difficult one." Others called her homely, strange, and worse, though they tried to mask it behind polite smiles. The preacher, Reverend Josiah Crane, hurried forward, his bookish frame swaddled in black cloth. "Welcome, my dear nieces," he said, voice cracking with emotion. "Charlotte, Annabelle, praise the Lord you made it safely." So that was their names, Eli thought. Charlotte, the beauty in blue. Annabelle, the one everyone else dismissed after a single glance. As introductions flew and suitcases thumped onto the dirt, Eli felt the weight of curious eyes pressing him from all sides. Because everyone knew he was the one the preacher hoped would court one of his nieces, Eli tried not to care. He had written to the Reverend only once, saying he needed help on the ranch and wouldn't be opposed to meeting someone of good character who understood life was more sweat than roses. But he hadn't asked for a pretty face or a miracle. He certainly hadn't asked to be the subject of town gossip. Still, when Charlotte's gaze found him, he felt the jolt. She walked toward him with a practiced grace, every step measured, as if she had spent years learning how to glide instead of walk. "You must be Mr. Mercer," she said, offering her gloved hand. "My uncle has told us so much about you." Her voice was smooth as cream, her smile bright and confident. Eli straightened and took her hand, nodding. "Ma'am," he said. "I'm Eli." She laughed lightly. "Well, Eli, I hope you'll show us the town sometime. It's all very rugged." Her eyes swept over the dusty street and the rough wooden buildings with faint disapproval, though she hid it under honeyed charm. Behind her, Annabelle bent to lift a scuffed valise, almost dropping it in the dirt. No one moved to help, no one except Eli. It happened before he thought about it. He stepped past Charlotte and reached for the handle. "Here, miss, I got it," he said. Annabelle blinked up at him, obviously surprised. "Thank you," she replied softly, her voice low but steady. Up close, Eli noticed things others missed. The way sunlight picked up flecks of amber in her dark eyes, the tiny crease between her brows that suggested she'd rarely known rest, the roughened skin on her palms that spoke of work. Real work, not just needle and lace. "You must be tired from the trip," he added. She gave a small, awkward smile. "Tired and dusty, I imagine. I apologize if I've already offended the town's sense of elegance." There was a dry edge of humor in her words. Eli's lips twitched. Town's sense of elegance is mostly wishful thinking, he said. You'll fit just fine. But the town did not agree. Over the next week, Redemption Ridge sorted itself neatly into two groups, those who floated around, Charlotte like moths circling a lantern, and those who shook their heads over Annabelle, saying things like such a pity and bless her heart, which everyone knew were just polite ways of calling someone unwanted. Charlotte flourished under the attention. She played the piano at church socials, fluttered her lashes at every eligible bachelor, and spoke often of the grand cities back east and the gowns she had left behind. She complained about the dust, the heat, the way the stars were too bright at night. It's impossible to sleep, she'd say dramatically, pressing a hand to her forehead. Everything here is so loud and wild, like it hasn't learned its place yet. Men laughed and nodded, bewitched by the sway of her skirt and the scent of her imported perfume. Annabelle, meanwhile, disappeared into the background whenever she could. She helped Mrs. Halper stock shelves at the general store, gently redirected rowdy children during Sunday school, and spent evenings quietly reading by lamplight on the parsonage porch, her hands folded around a worn book of poetry. Few noticed that she also rose, before dawn, to help her uncle chop wood, or that she carried baskets of food to the sick and old who couldn't make it to town. When she did attract attention, it was rarely kind. She's too direct, some women said. Too stubborn. Men complained that she looked them in the eye instead of simpering, that she asked questions about their work and their views, as if their opinions actually mattered beyond impressing her. No man wants to be interrogated by his wife. One ranch hand snorted over a beer. He wants to be admired. Eli watched it all with a growing sense of unease. He spent most daylight hours on his ranch, repairing fences and driving cattle, but at night the town's murmurs seeped into his bones. When the Reverend invited him to supper, the whole town held its breath. It's time you thought of the future. Eli, Reverend Crane said, ladling stew into bowls as they sat at the simple wooden table. No man should live alone on this wild land. My nieces would make excellent wives. Charlotte has many social graces. Annabelle is practical, industrious. Prey on it. Eli didn't much like being pushed, but he couldn't deny he was tired of eating in silence and waking to empty rooms, so he agreed to spend more time with them. He quickly discovered that conversations with Charlotte felt like walking through a fine parlor you were afraid to touch. Everything was pretty, polished, and distant. When he spoke of the ranch, of long winters, sick cattle, and endless repairs, she frowned delicately. Surely you could hire more men and come into town more often, she said. A man of your stature should be seen. Why people notice such things. When he asked about her dreams, she spoke of wanting a bigger house, of hosting respectable parties, of wearing silk instead of cotton. None of it was wrong, but it slid off his heart like water off wax. With Annabelle, things were different. One evening, he found her sitting at the edge of the parsonage garden, dirt smudged on her cheek as she tried to coax new life out of withered soil. Those plants look stubborn, he remarked, crouching beside her. She huffed a laugh. They're not stubborn. They're just shocked. Someone ripped them out of where they belonged and tossed them here, expecting them to bloom immediately. Eli glanced at her, recognizing the shadow behind her words. You talking about the plants or yourself? She brushed a curl from her forehead, leaving a streak of dirt there. Maybe both, she admitted. We lost our parents back east. Uncle Josiah tried his best, but there was no money and no one wanted to marry a woman who speaks her mind and doesn't flutter at every compliment. She gave a small shrug. So here I am, hoping the Lord has some use for me in this place. Eli found himself telling her things he hadn't voiced since his wife died. About the night the fever took her. About the cruel quiet that followed. About his fear of choosing wrong again. Annabelle listened without judgment, her gaze steady, her hands still gently patting soil around fragile roots. Love isn't a business deal, Eli, she said quietly. It's not about who looks best on a church pew or who impresses the neighbors. It's about who will stand beside you when everything falls apart. Her words stayed with him, echoing through the lonely rooms of his house like a distant song. The town, of course, assumed they knew how the story would end. He'd be a fool not to choose Charlotte. The barber declared one afternoon as he trimmed a customer's hair. She's the kind of wife that makes a man look successful. Annabelle's all sharp edges and plain cloth. The rumor grew legs and ran. Women gossiped at the well. Men nudged each other in the saloon. Bets were made quietly over cards. No one asked Eli what he really wanted. They just assumed. And then came the Founders' Day picnic, the day everything changed. The whole town gathered in the meadow just beyond the church. Tables groaned under the weight of pies, roasted meats, and fresh bread. Children chased each other through tall grass while fiddles played lively tunes. The heat of afternoon softened into gold, bathing the mountains in light. Eli arrived late, hands still smelling faintly of horse and leather, heart heavier than he wanted to admit. He knew the Reverend hoped he would make some kind of declaration today, maybe even propose. Charlotte certainly expected it. She wore a stunning lavender dress that turned every head, her hair arranged in an elaborate style that must have taken hours. Annabelle, by contrast, wore simple deep green that somehow made her eyes look almost luminous. Though few noticed. During a lull in the music, the Reverend stood on a crate and cleared his throat. "Friends," he announced, "we gather today not only to celebrate the founding of Redemption Ridge, but to recognize how the Lord continues to build our community. My nieces have been blessed to find such welcome here, and I believe it is time we speak of the future. Mr. Eli Mercer, would you join us up front?" The meadow quieted. Heads turned as Eli stepped forward, cheeks flushing under the weight of all those eyes. Charlotte glowed, already imagining the outcome. Annabelle stood very still near the edge of the crowd, her hands clasped tightly as if bracing for a blow. "Eli," the Reverend said, voice warm and booming, "you are a man of integrity and standing. This town respects you. I know you have grown close to my nieces, and I believe the time has come to declare your intentions. The Lord does not delight in confusion." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Eli's heart thundered against his ribs. He hadn't agreed to this spectacle, but backing down now would only feed the gossip. He looked at Charlotte, who smiled dazzlingly, already stepping forward, then at Annabelle, whose eyes were wide, uncertain, already ready to be rejected in front of everyone. In that moment, Eli saw the future laid out in two paths. One was easy, celebrated, polished. The other was rough, complicated, and real. He knew which one the town expected him to choose. He also knew which one would let him sleep at night. He took a breath, removed his hat, and turned toward Charlotte first. "Miss Charlotte," he said, voice steady but low, carrying clearly in the hush. "You are truly a fine lady. Any man would be honored to call you wife." Charlotte's smile widened, and the crowd leaned forward. "But," he continued, and the words sliced through the afternoon like a knife. Her smile faltered. Gasps fluttered. "But I believe we want very different things from this life. You belong somewhere bright and grand, where folks dress up for dinner and talk about theaters and balls. My world is dust and cattle and hard winters. I won't ask you to trade your dreams for my fences." A stunned silence followed. Charlotte's cheeks flushed crimson, her eyes filling with angry tears. She stepped back, lips trembling, mortified before the entire town. Eli turned then, hat still twisted in his hands, to face Annabelle. She stared at him, eyes shining with disbelief. "Annabelle," he said, and her name felt right in his mouth, like a word he'd been practicing his whole life. "You and we understand the dark, I think. We know what it means to lose things you can't get back, but you also see the world the way I do, as something worth fighting for, worth fixing. One fence post, one fragile plant at a time." He swallowed, aware of how his voice wavered. "I don't promise you riches or ease. I can only promise early mornings, honest work, and a man who will stand by you the way you stand by others. If you'll have me, I'd be honored to call you my wife." The meadow erupted. Some people gasped in outrage. Others whispered furiously. A few, like Mrs. Halper, simply smiled, as if something they had secretly hoped for had just come true. Charlotte turned away, shoulders stiff, pride shattered by the public rejection. The Reverend looked stunned, his mouth opening and closing without sound. All eyes shifted to Annabelle, the woman everyone had overlooked, despised, or dismissed. Her hands shook, and for a heartbeat she looked like she might run. Then she drew in a long, trembling breath and squared her shoulders. "Eli," she said softly, but her words carried, as if the whole town had been waiting to hear her voice. "All my life people have made choices about me without ever asking what I wanted. They saw my face, my scar, my plain dress, and decided my worth." Her gaze swept across the crowd, meeting the eyes that had judged her. But you asked me questions. You listened. You saw more than what others whisper about. A shy, luminous smile touched her lips. I don't want grand ballrooms. I want a table where laughter feels at home. I want land that needs tending and a partner who doesn't run when the sky turns dark. If you're truly sure if this isn't some attempt to shock the town or play hero, then yes, I will marry you. Eli's chest loosened, relief and joy flooding him like sudden rain over dry earth. He slipped the simple silver ring that had belonged to his mother off a chain around his neck and placed it gently on Annabelle's finger. It wasn't much, but as it caught the light, it looked to him like a promise made solid. The town buzzed for weeks afterward. Some said Eli had lost his mind, that rejecting the beautiful sister for the difficult one was proof he'd spent too long alone under the sun. Others shook their heads and speculated that Annabelle had bewitched him. But a smaller, quieter group watched the pair ride out to the ranch together and saw something else: the way Eli's shoulders relaxed when Annabelle laughed, the way she sat the saddle confidently, not complaining about dust or distance. They saw two people who fit not because the town approved, but because their broken edges aligned in a way that made them both stronger. That was the day the story truly began. And if you've stayed with this tale so far, friend, don't forget, these Wild West stories are just getting started. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next chapter of Eli and Annabelle's journey out on Redemption Ridge, where love chooses courage over appearances, and every heart gets a second chance under the wide open sky.